The court is silent. The tension is palpable. The judge seriously observes the room as the lawyers prepare for the hearing. On the left side of the room, two corrupt police officers. They talk discreetly, exchanging complicit glances, unaware that everything they had planned was about to fall apart. They think the case is under control. They believe that nothing can stop them, that they are above the law, but something is about to happen that will turn everything upside down. In a corner of the room, sitting calmly, is a man who appears to be nothing more than an ordinary citizen. He observes, impassively, the relaxed behavior of the police officers, who laugh, sure that nothing can expose them. But what they don't know is that this seemingly simple man carries a secret that will change the course of their lives forever. "Are you sure nothing can go wrong?" The sound of their laughter echoes through the room, but the question is about to be answered brutally clearly. The man, who now everyone is starting to notice, slowly gets up. He takes his badge out of his pocket and with a simple gesture reveals the identity that no one expected. He is the director of the FBI. The room freezes. What started as a relaxed conversation between corrupt police officers, now it turns into a live nightmare. What would police officers do now when they find themselves cornered by someone who has the power to destroy their careers and their lives? Their reaction will be the turning point, and the court will be the scene of a shocking twist. Now they will have to deal with more than the accusation they had tried to cover up. They will have to face the FBI director, and the worst part, there is no longer any escape. As silence settles in the courtroom, all eyes turn to the corrupt police officers who were laughing minutes before. They don't seem so confident now. One of them, the most experienced, tries to hide his growing panic, but his eyes betray his nervousness. The other, younger and more impulsive, turns visibly pale when he realizes that something is very wrong. They were sure they were in control of the situation, but little did they know they were dealing with something much bigger than they expected. Those corrupt police officers were involved in an extortion scheme and trafficking in confidential information. They used their position of power to manipulate processes and protect powerful criminals, all for money. In their minds, they were above the law. The feeling of impunity was constant, and they believed that no one would have the courage to face them, especially in a judicial system that was already full of flaws. On the other side, the FBI director, which stood up at a crucial moment, represents the line of defense against corruption and abuse of power. His presence in court is not only the revelation of his identity, but the embodiment of the justice that the police officers so feared. The defense lawyers, visibly nervous, begin to mutter among themselves, trying to find a logical explanation for what is happening. They don't know how to react, and the courtroom is filled with tense silence. The FBI director, now in no hurry, begins to walk towards the officers, the looks in his direction becoming more intense. What appeared to be a simple accusation of police misconduct turns out to be a much more complex and dangerous plot. "You corrupt police officers." Now they realize that the weight of the accusation they face is no longer just about a mistake made on the job, but about something that could ruin their lives and careers forever. When they realize who is really behind the accusation, the psychological pressure increases. They know the FBI has the resources to ruthlessly expose and punish their corruption. This unexpected turn of events puts everyone in the courtroom in an uncomfortable situation. They started out with the expectation that the case would be simple, but now everything has changed. It's not just a question of local corruption, it's a fight between defenders of justice and those who subvert it. A battle of power where corrupt police officers face a force they underestimated. And justice, as always, is about to be served. The court is now completely tense. You corrupt police officers who were once confident that they would escape easily begin to feel disoriented. The judge, after a few seconds of surprise, asks everyone to calm down. The man who introduced himself as the FBI director positions himself, his eyes fixed on the corrupt police officers who are now sweating cold. The silence in the room is almost palpable, and everyone wonders what will happen next. The first movement of FBI director, it is not a shout or an obvious accusation. He starts with a simple glance at the defense attorneys, then slowly turns to the corrupt police officers. His voice, steady and unflappable, echoes through the room as he begins to explain how he had been informed about the corruption plot that had been going on for months. It details how the police officers they had become involved with cartels and how they were manipulating investigations to cover up criminals, always in the shadow of a flawed judicial system. But the worst was yet to come. The FBI director reveals that he himself had been a victim of the scheme, having been informed through sources within the system itself of a conspiracy to incriminate innocent people and free powerful criminals. It accurately details the involvement of corrupt police officers in several incidents, bringing concrete evidence that had been collected during months of undercover investigation. You corrupt police officers who were so confident before now begin to exchange nervous glances, trying to find a way to escape. The more experienced of the two tries to maintain his posture, but the words he FBI director uses to describe them are irrefutable. He mentions the abuse of power, the destruction of lives, and the way these police officers they had taken advantage of their position to corrupt the justice system. The FBI director highlights how the corrupt police officers they were breaking not only laws, but also fundamental human rights. The seriousness of the accusation leaves everyone present in the courtroom in shock. They weren't just being accused of minor corruption or abuse of power. What was at stake was the very fabric of justice and the trust that the population had in the institutions responsible for protecting it. While the FBI director reveals this information, panic begins to grow among the corrupt police officers. They try to defend themselves, but their words are weak and baseless. They are now faced with an unbeatable accusation and the reality that their professional and personal lives are about to be destroyed. This accusation, which once appeared to be just a simple case of police misconduct, has now turned into something much bigger. A corruption scandal that directly affects public trust in police forces. The FBI director is making its final move, placing the last piece in the puzzle that will reveal the true extent of corruption and the despair of a system that had allowed itself to be corrupted. As the FBI director continues to expose the evidence and dismantle the corruption case of corrupt police officers, the courtroom transforms into a scene of tension and despair. The first police officer, the most experienced, begins to sweat profusely. His expression that once reflected confidence now reveals growing fear. He tries to stand his ground, but his eyes move nervously around the room, as if searching for a way out, a way to avoid impending doom. The second police officer, younger and more impetuous, cannot hide his panic. His hands shake slightly as he looks at the judge, then at the defense attorneys, and finally at the FBI director. The mask of arrogance they had worn until then begins to fall, and what once seemed like a simple accusation now becomes an irreversible nightmare. The FBI director calmly observes their reaction. He knows that by exposing the details of the criminal actions of police officers is not only putting an end to a network of corruption, but also ripping away public trust in the authorities responsible for security. But he also knows that his mission goes beyond that. He is, right now, seeking justice not just for the victims of corruption, but for all citizens who depend on the law to secure their lives. Human rights and your safety. The defense lawyers. try to intervene, but their defensive posture seems fragile in the face of the unquestionable evidence presented by the FBI director. The words of FBI director continue to echo in the room, and the corrupt police officers, they already know they have no way to escape. Their every movement now feels desperate. Every word that comes out of their mouths sounds hollow. The courtroom is an arena where all eyes are on the corrupt police officers. And as they sink deeper and deeper into their lies and fallacies, the weight of the accusations becomes impossible to ignore. The judge observes the scene with a serious expression, clearly impacted by the magnitude of the revelations made. The room is completely silent, except for the words of the FBI director, which are now addressed directly to corrupt police officers. He says, firmly and authoritatively, "You didn't just abuse the power in your hands, you destroyed lives and corrupted the people's trust." These words penetrate deep like a blow of reality. The disbelief and shock on the faces of corrupt police officers are evident. They know they have nothing more to do, nothing to say. Their fate was sealed the moment they underestimated the force of justice. Now they are being confronted not only with the evidence, but with the true magnitude of their error. The moment is electrically charged. Justice is about to be served, but what do the corrupt police officers? What they don't know is that the consequences go far beyond a simple court conviction. Their lives, their careers, and their freedoms are about to be destroyed. The mood in the courtroom is heavy, as if the air has grown thicker after the rising tension. The words of FBI director still reverberate in everyone's mind, and the corrupt police officers, now completely without escape, appear to be in a state of shock. However, what no one could imagine, not even the most experienced lawyer or the judge, is that the real turnaround was about to happen. The FBI director, who until then had been conducting the accusation with clinical precision, decides it's time to reveal something even more shocking. He turns to the judge and with impressive calm announces, "I'm not just here as director of the FBI. I'm here because I'm the victim." The entire room becomes completely silent. No one dares to breathe. The look of FBI director is relentless as he watches the corrupt police officers. He continues, slowly, explaining how corrupt police officers they had become involved in an even deeper conspiracy than they had already revealed. They had, in fact, attempted to cover up a series of investigations involving powerful figures within the government itself. The director, in a calculated manner, tells how the corrupt police officers, how they had manipulated information to protect those above the law, and how, in doing so, they had put the lives of thousands of innocent citizens at risk. But most shockingly, it reveals details about how the very investigation they tried to hush up involved a series of human rights being violated, and how these corrupt police officers, they were directly involved in a network of abuse that already affected several victims. The impact of this revelation is devastating. You corrupt police officers, now completely disoriented, begin to look at each other in terror. The young police officer tries to react, but his words are blocked. He tries to defend himself, but his voice cracks and his posture begins to give way under the weight of the evidence. The more experienced veteran looks at the judge with a look of despair. They know there is no longer any way to hide the truth. The room is in controlled chaos, with people murmuring, some completely in shock, others even with tears in their eyes. What seemed to be a simple case of abuse of power has now turned into a gigantic conspiracy involving institutional corruption at levels never imagined. The revelation of FBI director not only condemns the corrupt police officers, but it also sends a clear message to everyone in the courtroom: justice cannot be corrupted. It doesn't matter how deep the network of abuse is, she will be exposed, it will be dismantled, and the price of corruption will be paid. With the revelation made by FBI director, the court goes into a frenzy. You corrupt police officers who were once confident that they could manipulate the situation to their advantage, are now completely out of control. The veteran, the more experienced of the two, tries to get back on his feet, but his hands are visibly shaking as he looks desperately at the judge. He knows that there's no longer any escape, that the evidence is irrefutable, and that his career, his freedom, and everything he has built over the years are about to fall apart. The youngest of corrupt police officers, with a pale face and wide eyes, desperately tries to argue, but his words come out rushed and without conviction. He feels as if he is sinking into an endless abyss. Guilt and fear engulf him, and he begins to realize the gravity of the situation he has placed himself in. The FBI director stands firm, calmly observing the reaction of the corrupt police officers. He knows his mission is not just to win the case in court, but also to restore trust in institutions. With the weight of the revelations, he reinforces the seriousness of the case, stating that the impact of police corruption goes far beyond the walls of that court. He talks about the human rights violated, the lives destroyed, and how this type of abuse of power affects the population's trust in the security forces. At that moment, the FBI director turns to the audience present in the courtroom, and his voice resonates with a tone of urgency. He makes an emotional appeal, reminding everyone that when justice is corrupted, the entire system fails. He challenges everyone to reflect on the consequences of abuse of power and silence in the face of injustices committed, not only by police forces, but also by those who support them. As he speaks, the room falls into a deep silence. Many of those present are shocked, and others seem moved by the words of someone who is willing to fight to protect the justice and the human rights, even in the face of gigantic adversity. The reaction of the public, still stunned, begins to transform into a growing wave of support for the FBI director. People know that he is not just representing justice in this specific case, but that he is combating a systemic problem that affects all of society. He is not just seeking to punish corrupt individuals, but to restore the dignity of victims and ensure that the true police justice prevail. You corrupt police officers, now completely defeated, try to react, but it is too late. They realize that their attempts to manipulate the judicial system have failed. The eyes of the public, the eyes of the court, are now on the true justice that is about to be applied. The judge, in a decisive act, orders the immediate arrest of the corrupt police officers without further ado. The courtroom erupts in murmurs, with some people quietly applauding, others watching with a sense of relief and hope. The FBI director. He stands there, impassive, watching the fall of two men who for so long abused their position of power. He knows that this victory, although significant, is just one part of a much larger fight that must continue. He also knows that this story will serve as a lesson to others who believe they can get away with crimes committed under the cloak of authority. With the arrest of corrupt police officers and sentencing imminent, the court begins to calm down, but the impact of this trial goes far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The FBI director, after the victory over corruption and injustice, becomes a symbol of resistance and strength against the failures of the police system. On the streets, the news of the arrest of corrupt police officers spreads like wildfire. People start talking about the case, and soon peaceful protests begin to emerge in support of the case, FBI director, and greater transparency in institutions. The fight against police injustice gains momentum, with human rights groups and activists marching for justice and change within the system. Many highlight the impact of police corruption and how the case of Olivia and the others involved in the investigation became a landmark in the fight for human rights. However, this public recognition does not come without challenges. The FBI director knows that although it has won an important battle, the war against institutional corruption is far from over. He is approached by several media outlets, being interviewed by journalists, politicians, and even civil rights organizations who want to know more about the case and how he plans to continue his fight. The media begins to praise the work of the FBI and the director himself, highlighting how he exposed and dismantled a corruption scheme within the police itself. But the story is not just about victory. The consequence of this revelation reaches the highest spheres of power and the names of politicians and influential figures who were involved in protecting the corrupt police officers. The FBI director, although already a hero to many, begins to face new obstacles. Powerful allies of corrupt police officers, they try to minimize the impact of the trial, questioning the impartiality of the investigation, suggesting that it was all just a big mistake or even a political setup. At that moment, the FBI director finds itself in an even more complicated position. He knows that to ensure true justice, he cannot allow himself to be intimidated or succumb to pressure from powerful figures trying to cover up the crimes committed. He then decides to make his mission public, presenting himself in interviews and speaking about the need for police reforms that guarantee the responsibility of security forces. The public now sees in him not just the leader who dismantled a network of corruption, but the man who is willing to fight against the oppression of a system that protects corrupt police officers and ignore the human rights of the population, especially minorities. The work of FBI director goes beyond a simple investigation. It represents the clash against a system that often fails to protect those who need it most. After the trial and arrest of the corrupt police officers, the FBI director finds itself now at the center of intense public and political scrutiny. While the court victory was an important milestone, the real battle has only just begun. The system's response, both from the police and from government institutions, begins to become evident. The FBI director faces a series of pressures. Politicians allied with corrupt police officers try to discredit him, claiming that his actions may have been excessive and that he should suspend his campaign for reforms. But he doesn't give in. With a firm stance, he publicly declares that the fight against police injustice is not a matter of personal interest, but an urgent need to restructure the system so that human rights are respected and victims of abuses of power receive justice. At a press conference, he answers difficult questions, reaffirming that although some try to minimize the case, the police corruption cannot be ignored. He points out that while many citizens trusted the corrupt police officers to protect their communities, these same police officers, they were destroying lives and perpetuating the cycle of violence. And more. This is not an isolated fight. He remembers that many others are fighting alongside him, so that cases like this are no longer the exception, but the rule. Your mission now is to ensure that justice prevails. With the resistance that arises against his campaign for transparency, the FBI director finds himself forced to confront powerful figures who were protecting corruption within the police forces. The discussions intensify, and he finds himself face to face with some of the greatest defenders of police corruption within the justice system. But with each confrontation, he becomes more resolute, more committed to his mission to expose the truth and transform the system. External pressure, however, is not the only difficulty. Himself, FBI director, begins to be the target of personal attacks. His family is threatened, and his professional credentials are questioned. But without hesitation, he continues to advance. He receives support from activists, organizations, human rights, and ordinary citizens who recognize the importance of their struggle. Through his words and actions, he becomes an inspirational figure for all who seek justice, not just those who have been directly affected by the police injustice, but also for those who believe in a more equal and fair future. This moment in history is crucial, as it highlights not only the personal challenge of the FBI director, but also the clash with the forces that try to maintain the status quo and continue perpetuating a failed system of justice. The battle is no longer just against corrupt police officers, but against an entire system that for a long time has protected abuses of power. After the arrest of corrupt police officers and public reaction in support of its mission, the FBI director begins a movement to reform the police and restore trust in institutions. Its goal is to go beyond punishing the guilty and create a system that is truly accountable, transparent, and ethical. But while he proposes new guidelines and policies for human rights, he soon discovers that the resistance within the police forces and government runs much deeper than he imagined. Even with the support of the population and many human rights, the FBI director faces fierce opposition from political figures and faction leaders within the police who benefit from the police corruption. For them, any attempt at reform is seen as a direct threat to their authority and the power they possess. Some of them even try to discredit the work of the FBI, claiming that he's undermining the morale of security forces and devaluing the work of honest police officers. This rhetoric, although fallacious, begins to gain strength, and the FBI director finds himself increasingly politically isolated. In response, the FBI director organizes a series of public hearings and conferences, inviting experts in human rights, investigative journalists and community leaders to openly discuss the failures of the police system. He wants to make sure everyone knows that the reforms are not revenge on police officers, but rather a way to ensure that all people, regardless of their color or social class, receive fair treatment. He calls this rebuilding public trust, and his words are echoed in different parts of the country. Mass resistance within the police itself remains a significant obstacle. Many high-ranking officers feel their careers are at risk and begin to band together to block reforms that the FBI director tries to implement. In some cities, they mobilize groups of police officers to protest new policies, claiming that these reforms weaken police authority and put their lives at risk. The narrative is driven by a minority within police forces who see the reforms as a threat to the status quo. Meanwhile, the FBI director begins to be attacked by other means. His integrity is questioned, and rumors surface that he is using his position for personal or political purposes. The media, previously mostly in favor of reforms, is now beginning to diverge, with some outlets promoting more balanced coverage, while others begin to insinuate that their actions may be more politically motivated than a genuine quest for justice. He knows that to continue his fight, he will need to maintain public pressure and continue to be transparent about his goals. In moments of despair, the FBI director seeks support from victims of police abuse and the activists who accompanied him during the initial investigation. Together, they carry out a series of peaceful protests and media campaigns, seeking to maintain public attention on the need for urgent reforms. The key is to ensure that the core message of the fight against police corruption and injustice never be forgotten. As the FBI director faces increasing resistance, he begins to realize that the police reforms he is trying to implement require much more than just law enforcement. To ensure that his work is not in vain, he needs a popular movement, a solid foundation that supports change and pressures the system to evolve. He makes a public appeal to the nation, sharing his vision of a future where police injustice and others' police corruption are eradicated, and where security forces are truly responsible for their actions. In a landmark event, the FBI director meets with human rights leaders, victims of police abuse, and activists from different parts of the country. Together, they formulate an action plan that not only aims to remove corrupt police officers, but also the creation of a system of external monitoring, which ensures that all police actions are tracked and audited in real time. Additionally, they propose significant changes to police recruitment and training policies, with a focus on human rights, anti-racism, and professional ethics. This action begins to gain strength, with large popular demonstrations in several cities, demanding that corrupt police officers are removed and that the reform is implemented. Public pressure is immense. Politicians who previously opposed reforms are beginning to back away, aware that their voters want change, not the status quo. The media, which had already shown skepticism, is now beginning to support the cause more decisively, showing that the fight against police injustice, it is not just a question of politics, but of humanity. Meanwhile, the FBI director continues to work behind the scenes, coordinating with federal and local authorities to ensure that reforms are implemented with the utmost seriousness. He visits several police academies, participating in training sessions for police officers, and for the first time, the focus of the training is empathy, understanding human rights, and awareness of the impacts of police injustice in communities. He uses his position to ensure that the next generation of officers not only understands the importance of the law, but also learns to respect the rights of citizens. However, the fight is not easy. Throughout the process of implementing reforms, moments of great tension arise. Many within police forces still resist the changes, trying to sabotage the new protocols and laws. But the FBI director stands firm, reinforcing that its mission was never just about correcting the mistakes of the past, but about creating a future where the police are an ally of the community and not an institution that perpetuates violence and oppression. The culmination of this story is the implementation of the reforms. Changes are beginning to be visible in various parts of the country. The new police monitoring structure is beginning to show rapid results, with lower rates of abuse of power and police injustice. The number of cases of police corruption begins to decrease, and society begins to see a more transparent and responsible police force. In the end, the FBI director not only wins the battle against corrupt police officers, but also leads a quiet revolution in America's police justice system. It becomes a symbol of courage, resistance, and proof that the fight for human rights and justice, it is never in vain, even when it seems impossible to win. This victory is not just that of one person, but that of an entire society that has decided to no longer tolerate police injustice. The impact of reforms goes beyond the work of one man. It marks the beginning of an era where true justice can finally be achieved. To make sure you don't miss the next story, check if you're already subscribed to the channel. Sign up and see you next time.